Welcome everybody to the latest BuffZone podcast. I'm Brian Howell. Pleased to be joined, as always, by my colleague Pat Rooney, who is across the pond a little bit over in Maui. Pat, how you doing?
Halfway across the pond.
Halfway across the pond. But how
Al-
you doing?
al- Aloha, Mr.
Yeah.
Howell. How are you?
I am good, and you've had quite the adventure in Maui, and we're going to talk about that here in a little bit, as well as obviously preview the football game against Oklahoma State. And let's start there. I do want to get to the Maui Invitational that the men's basketball team played in, which is why you're there, and we will talk about that here in a little bit. But let's talk football first because the Buffs obviously their season finale, which. Chatting with our colleague Adam Munstertiger earlier, I'm like, this is kind of nice. We're not doing a post-mortem and wrapping up the
Hey,
the season. I mean, we know there's a whole lot more coming up. Whether it may just be one more game with the bowl, it could be a Big 12 title game, but we got a Heisman ceremony and all this stuff coming up. So, there's a lot still coming up with the football, but it should be a fun home finale.
yeah, absolutely. I think that's one thing Buffs fans, and I think most of them realize this. As disappointing as that loss was against Kansas, obviously took their own fate out of their own hands for the Big 12 title game and the college
Yeah,
football. Well, at least the Big 12 title game. If you get to it, then obviously the fate for the college football playoff is back in your own hands. But they'll need some help this week to get into that title game. However, perspective, right? I mean, this has been a heck of a season. To still be sitting here where the Buffs are going into the regular season finale. I mean, you hit it on the head. How many times have we been playing out the string with the mounting losses, often each one more miserable than the last one
yeah.
as we kind of staggered through November. So, regardless what happens this week, it should be a win against Oklahoma State. But regardless, there's a bowl game in this team's future, and that Big 12 title game isn't out of the question yet.
Yeah, I mean, even just a year ago, the Buffs were, 4-7 and heading to Utah without Shedeur Sanders, and it was just kind of all right, let's just wrap this thing up. This one, yeah, it's got a much different feel, and yes, there is some disappointment as to what happened last week in Kansas. That's tough because the Buffs, Coach Prime said it well this week, where he said, last week was obviously, or last year was about instilling hope. This year was about expectation. He goes, I love the fact that our fans are really disappointed because they expected us to do better, and we did too. And he goes, I love that the expectation is there, and that's been the difference between this year and last year's. There is expectation, and so the Buffs were riding high for about a month and so it was kind of weird to see them go out to Kansas and they didn't get blown out, but they just got manhandled. And it really wasn't you know, it was Kansas's game from start to finish, really, and that was surprising.
Yeah, going back to what you said about head coach Deion Sanders, he's kind of said that from the get-go this year. Last year there was hope. This year there's been expectation, and I think that to what you were saying, that kind of lends to the fans' disappointment. I mean, obviously you have a chance to get to the Big 12 title game. You want to capitalize, but I think the fans, obviously, as they should, bought into that expectation, and that's what made that loss hurt all the more. But still plenty to play for this team, right?
Yeah.
That Big 12 title games, it's going to take a few things to kind of go down on Saturday and Friday in the Buffs case to get this thing to happen. But regardless, it's been a heck of a season, and the Shador Sanders and the Travis Hunter show keep marching on. You had the update on all the awards lists this week, and besides the bowl game in this team's future, quite a few awards for these guys, probably in the future as well.
Yeah, and real quick, as far as I think Buffs fans most know what has to happen this week, but just to recap real quick, obviously it's a four-way tie going into this week between the Buffs, Arizona State, Iowa State, and BYU. Basically, CU needs to win and have two of those three lose. The other scenario would be the Buffs win and BYU loses to Houston, but then also Texas Tech wins against West Virginia. So either of those scenarios get you in. Either way, you're kind of depending on the results of two other games out there, but it's still a possibility. And even if that's not the case, Pat, they're sitting at 8-3. You win this one, then you go to bowl game, you win that one. There's a chance for a 10-win season, and those don't happen very often around here as well. And then, of course, as you mentioned, there's some trophies possibly to be won, and I would guess Travis Hunter's got the Heisman locked up at this point, but it'd be nice for him to have a really big game and sort of really solidify that. Shador Sanders, I'm not sure that Davey O'Brien is locked up by anybody, but if he has a huge game this week, maybe he can win that. And Travis has got about 50 other awards that he's looking at as well. So there is a lot to play for.
Absolutely. And for the Buffs part of the equation, obviously going against an Oklahoma State team that clearly the most disappointing team in the league this year. Some
Hmm.
of those other teams at the top of the pack of the Big 12 are among the most surprising of the season. The Buffs can probably be in that boat as well, but even more so, the Arizona State and BYU kind of being in that mix is definitely some of the pleasant surprise of the league. Oklahoma State's at the other end of that. They were, kind of considered one of the foremost favorites to win this thing. They go into this winless in the Big 12 so far this year. The Buffs intend to keep it that way. Just been a miserable season for them. And so for the bus part, you wrote a little bit about this just today. The run game. Oklahoma State has been dreadful against the run. I think that's one thing you and I, with me traveling, we haven't talked too much about that Kansas game. I thought the Buffs kind of reverted to old form, getting away from the run game, especially early in the Kansas game. Obviously, later you're behind. I get that, but early on, it seems like they kind of got away from even trying to get that thing going. This week should be a different story. I know Isaiah Gustav is banged up this week. We may not see much of him, but whoever the Buffs put back there should be able to have a good game against Oklahoma State, one of the worst run defenses in the country.
Yeah, they rank 133rd out of 134 teams. So yeah, that is one of
That
the
makes them
worst.
one of the worst in the country.
Now, on the flip side, the Buffs rank 134th in rushing offense. So that's even with Isaiah, I guess. If so, it's not a battle of strengths. It's a battle of whose weakness is not as weak this week.
But in fairness, a lot of that is all. I mean, not that the Buffs have been great in the run game, but a lot of that
Yeah,
total is also the sacks, especially early in the season. And
yeah,
then when you don't run the ball, otherwise, it adds up. So I don't think the Buffs have the worst running attack in the nation.
right.
The numbers say so, but I think a lot of that is skewered by the sacks total, especially early in the season when the offensive line was struggling more.
Yeah, I'm actually looking up as we're talking here because I'm curious, like how where they rank as far as like attempts per game because they've got to be yeah there's only two teams in the country that average fewer attempts per game than the Buffs
Yeah.
so that's part of it. They do have 14 rushing touchdowns, which is a big improvement over last year. So the Buffs they can run when they want to, they just don't always want to. And so but I think it'll be huge this week against Oklahoma State. And the other side, Ollie Gordon was the Doak Walker Award winner last year, not having a great season this year, but he's come on of late and is 130 yards away from 1,000 yards. And he's going to want to get that. And for an Oklahoma State team with nothing to play for, there's that to play for. And that's always a feather in the cap of a program to have 1,000-yard rusher. So it's a challenge to see who's run defense to, not let Ollie Gordon get his 130 yards this week.
And I think that's probably the key to the game, maybe for the Buffs in this one. I expect them to handle Oklahoma State pretty well. I think losing last week at Kansas kind of erased any chance of kind of a letdown being in this equation. The Buffs are going to be upset about that loss. Obviously, they
Mhm.
need a win to at least, you put pressure on. They need some results on Saturday to swing their way, but you put pressure on those teams by winning on Friday, and then you just kind of hope for the best. So
Yeah.
I think it should be a good day for the Buffs. I don't know if you're ready to get into predictions yet, but I see the Buffs handling Oklahoma State pretty well, something along the lines of a 34-17.
Yeah, I'm predict this is I think the first time this year I'm predicting a blowout for the Buffs. I mean, I think it's
Yeah.
a good thing that they're the very first game of the weekend in the Big 12. I like that they you can dangle that carrot in front of them. Like, look, you got everything to play for. Do your part, and then sit back and watch the rest of the games. Um, I would hate to be BYU playing the very last game of the weekend to where I mean, there's a chance. I don't know if there's a chance they're already out of it, but like for the Buffs, there could have been a chance they're already out of it, right? And so I like that they're first. And I, there's some debate. How do you go after a loss like last week? I think they're going to come back fired up and ready to go, wanting to get that sour taste out of their mouth, wanting to win in front of the Folsom fans. And I got them 45-20. I think it's going to be a blowout here and one that if you jump on Oklahoma State early, I think you break their will a little bit and you can cruise to a big victory. I think the Buffs are also going to try. Um, they not only want to win this game, I think they're going to want to try to get some stats for Travis Hunter. I think they're going to want to maybe get some stats for Shedeur Sanders. Some things that I mean, there's some awards out there that they can try to get and solidify those as well.
Yeah, I hope they don't get too bogged down in that. There's been a few times this year
Yeah,
where Coach Sanders in post games like, oh, we're trying to get this guy his 100 yards or get this guy his 100 yards, which is great if you get to that point. But I think if you go into this thinking, oh, we're going to pad some stance in this one, I think that's when you fall into the trap a little bit. So I want to see them come out sharp. I want to see them assert some will early, maybe dominate on both sides of the ball in that run game, like we discussed early. And then maybe later you can kind of start floating the ball around and putting up those numbers if you can get there. But I
yeah,
don't think they should get bogged down in that. On the other side of that, however, hard to see Oklahoma State, the whole play for pride thing and that sort of thing. I mean, at this point, you're winless. It's been a terrible season. You're going on the road. I don't know how much gumption this team's going to have in them when they haven't shown that much so far this season. So
yeah,
I expect the Buffs to be able to do what they want to do. I just, if you start doing that, though, you kind of get out of the game plan and kind of the task at hand. But I don't expect the Buffs to do that. I think they come out and win this one handily. I think you're on the same page with that.
yeah. I will say this though. I think when it comes to Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter, it can be in the natural flow where you're getting those stats because they're just so
Sure.
good that it can just be, all right, let's hit Travis deep. Let's do this. I think more so what we could see if like Jimmy Horn Jr. Is able to go. I know they really want to get him some numbers because he hasn't been able to play much and do his thing this year. I think that's where they could force feed something like that. So we'll see. But bottom line is, we're on the same page. I think the Buffs roll. They finish the regular season 9-3, and then sit back and watch on Saturday night and see. All right, where are we going? Do we get to have next week off, or are we going down to Arlington, Texas?
Yeah, and I've written about this a little bit too. Last time at Folsom Field for Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter, certainly for a lot of other players as well. But as far as what I've touched on, this is a special season that these guys have had and special talents. You don't get to watch guys like this too often, right?
Yeah,
It's probably the last time unless they squeak in the football playoff and I join you on the road in December somewhere. Probably the last time I'll get to see them play in person. And I know I'm personally, assuming I get home from this beautiful island on time, I should be there on Friday alongside you. And for me personally, I love quarterbacks, man. I grew up watching quarterbacks and appreciating good quarterbacks, and I've loved watching Shedeur Sanders from the get-go last year. I'm looking forward to watching both those guys in person one last time.
yeah. I will say when Coach Prime was hired 2 years ago, and I went down to that Celebration Bowl in Atlanta to cover that Jackson State. Wearing the sweatshirt right here. Um, and I saw Shador play in person the first time. Watching that, I was like, man, I can't wait. This gonna be a lot of fun to watch
Yeah.
him in a CU uniform. And 2 years later, it's sad that it's almost over, but you cherish these times. And obviously we're reporters and you try to be unbiased and everything, but it's also sports and it's fun, and it's been a pure joy to watch quarterbacking like that and a player like Travis Hunter. And so, hopefully, Buff fans come out and savor that one last time at Folsom Field.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, it's also our job to kind of observe and report. And these guys
Yeah,
are, have been great and they're fun to watch. I thought the same thing about KJ Simpson last year with the basketball season he put together. So, there's nothing wrong with appreciating greatness. We're supposed to be able to recognize it when we see it, Howell.
yeah,
And certainly these two guys have more than fit the bill this year. Looking forward to seeing them do their thing one more time at Folsom.
yeah. Well, it should be a lot of fun, and we're both picking Buffs to roll in this one. Um, a couple other teams that rolled this week were against the Buffs men's basketball team.
Yeah.
What a weird Maui Invitational. And it starts with a blowout loss to Michigan State, and then they upset the number two team and the two-time defending champion Yukon Huskies, and then get blown out by Iowa State. Were you anything surprised you, other than obviously beating Yukon did, but were you surprised at kind of the up and down nature of this week?
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of thought they would win a game here at some point. I didn't think they'd come home winless. I kind of wondered if they'd wind up in the 0-2 game on the last day and maybe eke out a win there. I certainly didn't have beating UConn on my bingo card, as they say.
Yeah,
But coming into this was supposed to be the first major test against major competition this year. Answer some questions about this team, and I think a few of them were. But you also kind of come back from this like, okay, which team is this going to be? And right now maybe it's a little bit of both. It's still a new look team.
yeah,
They're still just 7 games into this season. So and I'm gonna have a follow up that's going to be posted, over the weekend here, where Tad Boyle talks about this, that he knew there'd be some inconsistencies early in this season, right? The up and down nature, though, that it's been, it was pretty wild this trip, and it kind of makes you leave this tournament. I don't know if there's as many questions as when he came in, but he certainly didn't get things answered, right? I think they showed, though, with that UConn game that they can compete with some of the best teams in the country. And you know what? The Iowa State game, I think, was different for me than the Michigan State game. I thought Michigan State just beat them up,
yeah,
kind of punked them from the get-go. Um, Iowa State was a bigger score and they kind of, ran out of gym. The Buffs defense was not great. I still feel like the Buffs played harder, weirdly, against Iowa State than they did against Michigan State. Um, Iowa State just they hit everything. Everything they threw up went in. And some of that was on the Buffs as well. But
yeah,
I think the truth is somewhere in between. I'm already looking forward to, oddly enough, the Big 12 opener is going to be against Iowa State at the end of December. And I'm wondering how that game's going to play out. Haven't gotten a taste of them. Now you get them in Boulder. We'll see what happens. Um, but definitely a weird trip in Maui. The 1-2 part doesn't surprise me. The way it went down, I'm sure Buffs fans feel the same way. You couldn't have predicted that.
yeah. Uh, for me, and I didn't watch a ton. I saw some highlights from this week. I did not watch a ton, but the scores kind of tell me this is that there's a lot of really good teams and top end teams in the Big 12. I think the Buffs are probably going to lose a lot of those games, but what this week showed me is those top teams better come ready to play, or else the Buffs are capable of knocking you off. If you're at Kansas and you have an off game, like the Buffs have got some players that can knock you off, and so I think the Buffs are still going to hit their bumps in the Big 12, but I think the Yukon game, as you mentioned, is kind of one of those you look at and say, all right, there's something there. If they can catch some teams, to where maybe they're not their best that game, the Buffs are capable.
Especially when they get them at home in Boulder.
Yeah,
Typically a very good team at home. The Buffaloes are, especially under Tad Boyle. They have been pretty consistently. And I've said this to you since the beginning of the preseason. I don't think this is going to be the 15th place team in the Big 12. I don't think they're an NCAA tournament team, but I think they're going to be a tough out in the Big 12, especially in Boulder.
Yeah. Well, it's gonna be interesting to see how that plays out. 5-2, not a bad record at this point in time. Just kind of a weird way to get there this week. So, um, and I'm sure it was fun for you to be out there. Did you have some fun in Maui?
I did. You know, folks, I was trying to set you up with an ocean view here when me and Brian first got on. Unfortunately, the setting sun behind me was kind of, all you saw was me in a bright light. So we had to kind of go to plan B. Wish you all could see the view that I've got outside the window over here right now. So I've enjoyed it. It's busy, as always. On these trips, 3 games in 3 days, but great competition. Got to see some of the best teams in the nation. Definitely looking forward to getting home, though.
Yeah. Well, safe travels to you. And real quick before we get out of here, women's basketball earlier today goes down and beats Utah Tech. Really an up and down game. The Buffs kept pulling away by 12, 15 points, and Utah Tech would bring it back into 6-7. And the Buffs would go to 12, 15, 6-7, and then finally had that one last run. But they're 6-1 and off to a solid start. And back, they had that game at Boise a couple weeks ago. Their only loss. They're 0 of 17 from 3-point range. First time in 125 games they don't hit a three. Since then, they've hit 9, 9, 10, and 10 threes. So I think they've got their 3-point
Yeah.
stroke back.
Yeah, I wasn't too worried about that 0 for
Yeah,
17 being, the harbinger of some sort of pattern for this team or habit.
right.
It was a bad night. It happens on occasion in the course of a basketball season. So good to see them kind of get that 3-point stroke back on track, getting Frida Foreman back in the lineup and kind of getting her back up to speed. Certainly is a big boost to the Buffs on that front. And they seem to be kind of rounding into form a little bit. Obviously,
Yeah.
I wasn't able to watch the game today on Wednesday as we're chatting. Obviously, I was busy with the men's game, but looking forward to checking them out. And it's another team, like the men's team, a lot of new pieces, and they seem to be kind of, especially with Frida being out early. It'd be like the Bucks maybe having Julian Hammond out while they're kind of getting this new look group together, right? Your
Yeah.
your most experienced player, one of the go-to players, but having her back in the mix, kind of good sign that this team, not just that they're knocking down shots. We kind of think we both knew that was going to happen, but we'll see if they can kind of keep this going. And again, heading into Big 12 play in another few weeks for the women.
Yeah, and a big one on Saturday at the event center. Number 24 Louisville is coming to town, and 1 o'clock at the event center. The women will play in that game, and just a rare opportunity for a top 25 team choosing to come to Boulder, and so that's a big one for the Buffs. So a good early test for them. A couple other things. Since the last time we had a podcast, women's soccer season came to an end. They went out to Wake Forest and got beat in the second round of the tournament. So good season for them. Not a good middle of the season as we talked about earlier this year, but they were able to finish strong. And yeah, disappointing, but second round of the tournament, you'll take it.
Absolutely. They've made the tournament 8 times under Coach Danny Sanchez, and this is the sixth time they've gotten at least to the second round. So, uh, especially after a late slide to kind of sneak in, win a game in the Big 12 tournament, that helped. That pretty much turned into an elimination game, the first round comeback win against Utah. And then to kind of get a win in that first, go on the road and do it as well. Another comeback win to win at Georgia. You feel pretty good about the way the season ended. Didn't have Shira James for a good chunk of the last part of the season as well. But the future is still pretty bright for that team. The Leba twins will be back, or scheduled to be back. Jordan Nidas and goal should be back. Ava Priest had a great season in the midfield, the Boulder native. She should be back. Shira James is moving on, but like I said, they didn't have her for most of the latter portion of the season anyway. So most of this team should be back next year, and it should be a factor in the Big 12 again. And before we get out of here, volleyball is on the cusp of wrapping up its season. Just today, knocked off Kansas State in the home finale. Good to send the seniors off on the right note. Season kind of played out like we thought. Their young team had their ups and downs, inconsistent, very streaky. They piece a few wins together, have a few losses, and it kind of held that pattern the whole way. But they finished up on Saturday at Houston And another team that should have a lot of the on-floor contributors back next year. So we'll see how they grow in the next season.
Yeah.
Expecting to have a better season next year.
Yeah, this day and age, we have to say should because you never know what happens with the transfer
You
portal.
never know.
You just never know. But Pat, safe travels to you, and hopefully I'll see you at Folsom Field bright and early on Friday morning for the Buffs in Oklahoma State in the season finale for football.
I hope to be there too. If I'm not, I'm sitting in an airport or laid over somewhere. So,
Well,
so
safe travels to
uh,
you and Buff fans. We'll see you this weekend.